If you missed the unboxing video, let's go over some of the specs on these Krix speakers. For the LCRs, which means left, center, and right channels, I've put the OWX-50s behind my acoustically transparent screen. These speakers have dual 6.5-inch bass drivers with the Krix patented compression horn handling the high frequency. It's got a response of 60 Hz to 20K. You can mount these to your wall with the included mounting bracket, which you can also use to angle the speaker. It's a really slim speaker, measuring only 17 inches wide by 17 inches high by 6 inches deep, so these won't take up too much space on your wall. Handling the surrounds, I've got a pair of Hyperphonix 45s, which also have a 6.5-inch bass driver, and instead of the compression horn handling the top end, this uses a 1-inch fabric dome tweeter in a 90 by 90 waveguide. It's got a frequency response of 60 Hz to 20K, which is the same as the OWX-50. These also come with mounting brackets, so if you want to use these as either surround channels or if you want to mount these on your ceiling, you can do that with the bracket as well. And this is a really nice touch that they actually give you the mounting hardware for their on-wall speakers instead of you having to go out and find something yourself. These are also really slim speakers, measuring only 18.5 inches in height by 10.8 inches wide by 7.5 inches at its deepest point. Now, these speakers are only temporary loaners, so I didn't mount them to my wall, so I had to put them on stands instead. And I've only got 5 speakers, so I can't speak to their performance in a full-on immersive setup. Now, I got these hooked up to my Trinnov Altitude processor, powered by an Amplitude 8M amplifier, which puts out 200 watts per channel. I'll also be using a Zidoo media player for all these demos. I'm going to run through a couple of these demos, and I'm going to run these speakers full range without a subwoofer, and then again with subwoofers. All right, the first demo that we're going to check out is Midway, which I find to be great for channel panning and movement, plus it's got some of the best action movie bass ever.
Get the warning below deck! Get the warning below deck! Everyone else...
Well, you're definitely going to need a subwoofer for these speakers, but we already knew that. Now, the front stage from the 50s sounded huge compared to my RBH speakers. Not that they sounded small, but the horns on the Krix really showered my front wall from top to bottom. It almost sounded like the top front speakers were on, so I had to double check that they weren't. Now, I wasn't expecting a ton of bass from the front speakers, but they had a decent amount of punch, especially when things were blowing up. And this also goes for the surround speakers. The 50s had a little bit more depth, which was easy to tell when a plane would move from the front of the room to the back of the room, so you could feel that weight shift between both speakers. I doubt too many people are going to use these without subwoofers, but crossing these over to subs will kind of mitigate that and give you smoother panning. The 50s also had no issues playing at extreme levels. My ears were going to give out before they would, and neither them or the surrounds made any noise from their ports. I did feel that the Hyperphonix can sound a bit strained when I was pushing them to the impress your friends, my speakers are better than yours type of levels, while the 50s felt like they could keep going, which I'm going to attribute to that compression driver in the 50s. And it also became easier to hear how the explosions or the planes would change in timbre the louder that I turned up the volume between the two. Next, I popped on the first Venom movie to test out the center channel. Typically with smaller speakers with smaller drivers, the center channel can sound thin without any mid-bass reinforcement, and people can sometimes sound like little kids, which can make dialogue harder to hear. And in this movie, Venom has a very bass-heavy voice.
You come in here again. In fact, you go anywhere in the city preying on innocent people and we will find you. You come in here again. In fact, you go anywhere in the city preying on innocent people and we will find you and eat both your arms and then both of your legs and then we will eat your face right off your head. Do you understand? And eat both your arms and then both of your legs and then we will eat your face right off your head. Do you understand? We are Venom. We are Venom.
For this demo, I played only the center channel full range, and if you couldn't tell from this video, it has a good amount of bass in it. It falls a bit short from my personal RBH speakers, which has a much bigger enclosure and bigger drivers, but I can still hear his voice really resonate from the center channel, and it's got a really nice heavy presence to it. I actually got extension down to 46 Hz measured at my main listening seat, so if you wanted to run these a bit lower than the standard 80 Hz, I don't think you'll have an issue doing that. Oh, and keep in mind that I've got the speakers on stands. If you were to mount these speakers against your wall, you'll likely get a bit more bass from being closer to the wall through boundary gain. Now, I also put both speakers in my 2-channel setup to listen for tonality and musicality. And from a music-only perspective, I found that the soft dome tweeter and the Hyperphonix to have a more hi-fi feel to it. So the highs were crisper and sounded like there was more air on the top end. I always go back to Sweet Jane from the Cowboy Junkies because on some speakers it can sound really sibilant. So as she says the word sweet, the S's are sharper on the Hyperphonix, while on the 50s, that compression driver softens the treble response, which makes it come across more flat and neutral. It's as if the Hyperphonix comes to a sharp point while the 50 rolls it over on the top end. I wouldn't say the Hyperphonix is ear-piercingly bright or sibilant like the Focal Kenta number 3s when I had those in for review, but they clearly had more extension over the 50s. However, at louder volumes, I thought the Hyperphonix sounded a bit too bright while the 50s remained comfortable. Another thing I noticed is that that big horn on the 50 throws an enormous soundstage both vertically and horizontally. So in a home theater setup which has multiple rows, this is going to cover a huge area, especially if you have a second row that's on a riser. The Hyperphonix still sounded big horizontally, so that left to right spread was nearly as spacious as the 50s, but height-wise it did sound shorter. I actually preferred this shorter verticality for music over the 50s. I just felt like on the 50s the imaging was sometimes too tall, for music that is, whereas the Hyperphonix kept the soundstage more grounded and slightly more forward. I wouldn't say that either speaker was overly forward or overly bright, but with the Hyperphonix, those would lean more on the brighter side of neutral, comparing it to the 50s. Now, while I did think that detail was better on the Hyperphonix from a 2-channel standpoint, the 50 does have a 97 dB sensitivity, so with less power and with that wide coverage from the horn, it can absolutely scream at deafening levels, and I would imagine can fill a much bigger space than my home theater. Well, my home theater size at reference levels. I also think that the 50s have a more commercial cinema speaker sound to it. And what I mean by that is that it's got a touch of that horn-like quality to it, minus the overly shoutiness that you can sometimes get with other horn-loaded speakers. These actually reminded me a lot of the Procella speakers that I reviewed a couple years back, which also used a compression driver. And thinking of all the commercial theaters that I've ever been to, like IMAX, Dolby Cinema, RPX, Oro, and countless others, well, I've never found that any of those speakers have the utmost detail retrieval. I mean, they're able to play incredibly loud, fill huge spaces, but I've never thought to myself, oh, this sounds transparent and holographic. I think that softer top end on the 50s over the Hyperphonix is going to let you crank these speakers while still keeping your ears from bleeding. For my sized home theater, I would definitely go for all OWXs all the way around for that true cinema sound. And as far as I know, these are supposed to sound like an actual Krix commercial theater speaker. But for a smaller space where you're not going to crank the system to max level to impress your friends, I think an all Hyperphonix setup would be a good choice for a dual purpose home theater / music system. It's just that the 50s are going to be more effortless at louder volumes with that compression driver and in a dedicated theater. And again, I wasn't a fan of the 50s for music, but for movies, these are some of the best speakers that I've heard for that true home theater sound experience. And full disclosure, I never personally listen to music in my own home theater. I would much prefer having a speaker that has that commercial theater characteristic. So if you've ever been to an AMC or Regal, then you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Now, I'm sure that most people will probably be fine mixing these together like the setup that I have here. But I think that there is a big enough difference, well, big enough tonal difference between the two to not go ahead and mix and match. Of course, this is just my personal opinion, but I know if you've heard these speakers side by side, it's pretty clear they don't sound alike. So if you want to get perfect timbre matching, you gotta go all the same all the way around, no matter which speaker you go for. Overall, I thought these were fantastic sounding speakers. For really large rooms, I would go with the OWX-50s. Smaller to mid-sized spaces, I'd say the Hyperphonix or the 50s would be a great pick. But the Hyperphonix, to my ears, had the edge for music but the 50s will give you that real deal cinematic sound. So if you have a chance to hear an all-out Krix setup, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Now, I'm not sure what the prices are for these at the time of this video, since the Krix speakers are new to the US market, but once I find out, I will leave the pricing down below in this video's description. Now, if you have heard an all Krix setup, leave a comment and let me know what you thought about their performance. I would really like to know. Well, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next video.